Hello and welcome aboard. On today's flight we'll be going from London Heathrow to Toronto Pearson. So we are going to cross the Atlantic, so I'm very excited as that is not something you get to do every day. I am in the middle of setting up the aircraft here and getting the passengers loaded and etc. So we can get out of Heathrow. When we are airborne, we're going to talk a lot more about the Oceanic procedures, and we're of course going to work on getting our clearance done, or work on getting ready to ask the clearance, of course. So if you feel like freshening up your Oceanic skills, then stay with me, and once again, welcome aboard.
Heathrow. Speedbird 999 taxi all the way to the end of November Bravo 1. Okay. Virgin 5 Charlie, line 29, hold November Bravo 2 Whiskey. Line 29 to November Bravo 2 Whiskey, Virgin 5 Charlie.
Tower 73 on the 7 miles, Island 57 miles.
Shuttle 3 Romeo Heathrow, continue 27 right, wind 210 at 12.
In the approach 27 miles, go through there.
Heathrow Charlie, hello,
UPS 790 with you approaching Sierra 1.
Stand by, Condor 9 Papa Charlie, runway 27 left, surface wind 210 at 12, clear for takeoff.
Runway 27 left, cleared for takeoff. Condor 9 Papa Charlie.
UPS 79 Heathrow, hold Sierra 1.
Holding Sierra 1, UPS 79.
Speedbird 99 Heathrow. Speedbird 1 for Alpha, London 135.8, good day.
London 1358, bye-bye, Speedbird 1 for Alpha.
Shuttle 6 for uniform, right Alpha, ground 217.
Right Alpha, ground 217, thank you very much. Shuttle 6 for uniform. 2700 on lap.
Okay, you're still on tower, it's 1358, no readback required. Break, Shuttle 3 Romeo, runway 27 right, surface wind 210 at 12, clear to land. Air Canada 48 Romeo behind the departing, it's cargo 767 by November Bravo 3, line up to 7 left behind.
I'm the departing aircraft, line up on way, November Bravo 3, Air Canada 48 Romeo. Tower, Speedbird 99 Alpha, good afternoon, holding at Nevis.
Speedbird 99 Heathrow, hello, taxi, first right Lima, hold November Bravo 3.
First right Lima, hold November Bravo 3, Speedbird 99 Alpha.
Tower, good morning, Stuart 455 with you, holding short Lehman.
Condor 9 Papa Charlie, Heathrow, hello, Condor 9 Papa Charlie, London 134125.
London on 134.125. Condor 9 Papa Charlie. Bye bye.
Polar 15 Whiskey 27 left, wind 210 at 12, clear takeoff. Bang on slot time.
London Control, good day. Condor 9 Papa Charlie with you, passing 1,800 feet on the Goxi 2 Golf.
Condor 9 Papa Charlie, London Control, hello, climb flight level 90.
Climb flight level 90, Condor 9 Papa Charlie.
Hello, good day, Easy 894, flight level 130. Easy 894, London Control, hello, landing runway 26 left.
So far so good. We have departed London Heathrow and are well on our way, so it's time to start looking at the Oceanic clearance. If you haven't flown Oceanic before and you'd like to try it out someday, then this might contain some useful information for you. Before we prepare the actual clearance, I'm gonna go over some basic stuff, because a basic understanding of what's behind these procedures makes it much easier to understand, in my opinion. When I started out, I kept from doing Atlantic flights because I found it a bit confusing and I found the procedures a bit hard to grasp at first. It is really simple. It's just another set of rules that you have to follow. If you'd like to know everything in very great detail, I'm sure that a Google search will take you a long way. I'm just gonna cover the basics because myself, I'm a very hands-on kind of guy. That is why I chose to record this flight today. I found it hard to find a straight-to-the-point example of an Oceanic clearance with live ATC. There is a lot of very good videos out there telling everything, including real-world procedures, to a very, very high level of detail. But a straight-down-to-point example, at least I've had a hard time finding. So that is what you are going to get today. Please bear in mind that this tutorial only covers the basics and real-world procedures might differ a lot from what I'm telling you here. I'll start by explaining some of the concepts, and then we'll be looking at some flight planning, and at last we'll use the Gander website to fill out the clearance generator, and we'll use that to ask the clearance when we get so far. So the first question is, why is all this needed? The answer to that is separation. As there are no radar coverage over the Atlantic, there are simply nowhere to place the radars. Therefore, air traffic control needs another set of tools to ensure the separation between the planes going across the Atlantic. Normally, planes going across the Atlantic are separated by 10 minutes, and that is why we need to ask an Oceanic clearance and give position reports when flying in the Oceanic region. In other words, air traffic control depends a lot on the pilots to give realistic estimates and precise positions to determine exactly where the aircraft are in relation to one another. In the real world, position reports are not needed because there is a system in place called ADSB, which stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, and that is a system that allows the plane to send the positions down to the air traffic control via SatNav, and the system also utilizes other sensors on the plane. And that is another way for ATC to have position reports without the pilots actually doing them. During this event we are simulating ADSB, and that's actually the first time for me. The last time I flew Oceanic was with the good old position reports, which means that today I won't be doing them. I am actually not aware if this is temporary with the ADSB system or if that is something that is permanent now, so it's worth to check out, for example in the pilot briefing, if you're going to attend to some event crossing the Atlantic. Let's look at some flight planning. There are basically two ways to plan a route across the Atlantic. One of them is via a so-called NAT track, and another way is via random routing. This is basically two words for the same thing. If we take this as example, that is today's route. If we look here, that route consists of an entry point, which today is Tobol, and then it consists of a collection of waypoints. Here we have 53 north, 20 west, and if we move along we have another waypoint here, 54 north, 30 west, and so forth. On the other side here there's an endpoint, Recall for today, and then we'll follow a special route. That is something that is used in America. There's a special route that leads from the endpoint
and into the domestic airspace. I'm not going to cover that in any more depth than regarding the North American routes. As I said earlier, the two types of routes is basically the same thing. They consist of the same waypoints and the same endpoints and entry points here on the other side. But if it's exactly the same thing, then why does these NAT tracks exist? Well, the first aspect is that it's a neat way to organize the traffic going across the Atlantic. If there were no system in place, then you could quickly imagine that planes would go all over the place. Another aspect is the winds, jet streams to be more exact. So if we look at a map here, then it's pretty obvious that the jet stream here that you see here, it's going eastbound, and you can benefit from that when flying eastbound. On the other hand, when you are flying from Europe here and over to the US westbound, then you would like to avoid that jet stream, because that is just unnecessary fuel burn. So if we add the NAT tracks to the map here, then we can see there is only NAT track alpha available now here, and it is going pretty far north, and that is also due to the fact that we want to avoid the jet streams. Sometimes you can even benefit from flying further north to cross the Atlantic to avoid that heavy headwind. This is also the reason why that the NAT tracks change on a daily basis. There are no eastbound NAT track active as for now, but if there were, they would be much further south to again benefit from the jet stream that we clearly can see here. How do you determine what route to use when planning a flight across the Atlantic? That is entirely up to how much you want to go into detail. Some simmers like to study the routes that are flown by their favorite airlines and then replicate that in the sim, but there's also another relevant situation to talk about. For instance, the flight that I'm doing today, the Crossmas event, we are here flying on fixed routes, so there are no route planning in that really. For this event, there are created two fictitious NAT tracks that the pilots are to follow during the event. But don't worry, I will give you some tools and I will show you an example to how I would plan a flight across the Atlantic. A good place to start would be to see if there are any NAT tracks available, so let's look at it. A useful website to gain information is Virtual Norwegian's website. There you can see all the tracks here, and there's also a lot of useful literature if you want to read more about it. But as I said, you can see the tracks here, you can see the available flight levels, and you can see when the track will be active. This one, track alpha for instance, it will be active from tomorrow 11:30 UTC. If you scroll down to the bottom here, you can also see it visualized. There is a nice map here where you can see all the individual waypoints and of course all the active tracks. You can also go straight to the source if you want to see it in text format. If we look at the notams.faa.gov, you can see it here. If we take it from the top, you can see track Zulu here. There's of course the routing, and you can see when it will be active, the 21st of December from 01 Zulu to 08 Zulu. And if we scroll down here, of course there's also the westbound tracks. There's track alpha, which was the track that we saw in SimBrief just a moment ago. You can see the flight levels, the westbound flight levels, as this is a westbound track, and also that it will be active from the 21st December 11:30 Zulu to 19 Zulu. Now that we have this information, let's make an example route to see what kind of route we are going to use. If we go back to SimBrief, I have created a route that we can look at. I've created a route here that goes from Copenhagen to JFK. As it looks here, we are going to fly along NAT track alpha, but as we just learned a moment ago, that is not active. NetTrack Alpha will first be active 11:30 Zulu, and it's pretty late in the evening here by now. But that is actually not a problem. Since we can still fly the route, we are just not allowed to file it as NetTrack Alpha. We have to file it and we have to ask clearance as if it was a random routing. But we can still use exactly the same route. Let's take a closer look at the flight plan itself. If we scroll down to the Oceanic segment here, we can see the entire route written out for us here. So the easiest way to plan such a flight would simply be to put it into SimBrief. If we look at this clearance, it looks a lot like a random routing since we can see all the individual waypoints and not NetTrack Alpha, for instance. I'd always double check from another source if the track is active, and if it is, I would always file via NetTrack because that is simply just easier. If we look at the rest of the clearance here, we can even see that we have the flight level, requested flight level here, the requested MAC number, the CELCAL, that is of course optional if we put it in the planning stage, and the maximum Oceanic entry flight level, and that is also something we are going to report to air traffic control when asking for the clearance. More about that when we look at the actual clearance. If we go back to the map for a short moment, I've just realized that SimBrief only shows the relevant tracks, and I was actually not aware of that, so I have enabled all the tracks just to be able to show them in relation to one another. And if we show the weather here, we can also see that the eastbound track is much more south than the northbound track. Now that we have got the basics down, let's go to the Gander Oceanic website and I'll show you a neat little tool that will help a lot when going to ask an Oceanic clearance. If we navigate to the pilot section here, Oceanic Clearance Generator, we simply just fill out the form here and we get the clearance down here. It doesn't get any easier than that. Now let's take it step by step and let's wrap it all up before we ask the clearance. First of all, the call sign. We are flying Condor 9 Papa Charlie today. Then the requested flight level, which is flight level 340. Of course, it is important for air traffic control to know what flight level we are requesting, as there of course is a limit to how many planes and on what flight levels. Next up is the MAC number, which can either be found in the flight plan in case that SimBrief is used, or it can in some planes also be found in the FMS. Today we will request Mach 0.80. The speed is very important information for air traffic control. If they need to keep that separation of 10 minutes between the airplanes, then they for instance need to slow down a plane if it's flying very fast and the plane in front is going very slow, so they need to match the speeds so you won't have a collision over the Atlantic. The next point down here is the route, and if we continue with today's example, we are going along the fictitious NetTrack Sierra. So we'll type in Sierra and Tobor, which is the entry fix, and our estimated time. We can look that up in the FMC as well. Depending on what aircraft you're using, of course, that is the most reliable source. And today that is 1346 Zulu. Again, time is also a really important factor for air traffic control. This means that even though you are not in the Oceanic region yet, you have to look out for the time. Often you get a time restriction with your clearance. That could for instance be: do not cross Tobor before time 1400 Zulu, and in that case you would have to either slow down or request some kind of delay routing from the domestic controller. The last thing to fill in here is the TMI, which is not relevant to us today, but let us look at what it is anyway. If we go back to this website here, the North Atlantic Tracks, then we can see the TMI number. It is written right here. TMI is 356, and that corresponds to the current day, which is day 356 out of the 365 days in a year. And why is that important? Well, it's important because then air traffic control is certain that you have the correct track for the correct day. And as we can read here, then the TMI number is to be included in the Oceanic clearance readback. If we go back to the Norwegian website here, then we can take this as an example. We can see the TMI number is 287. So let us just say that we have filed track Bravo and of course entered this route here in the FMC, and then we in our readback to air traffic control set TMI 287. Then the controller would be aware that we actually are flying a wrong route because that is an inactive track. So if we hop back here, then we'll let this point here be blank, because as I said earlier, we are flying along a fictitious net track, which means that there would not be a TMI number. So let's hit generate, and we have our clearance here. And this is a really big help. There's only one thing that I would add to here, and that is your able flight level, because that is also something that air traffic control would like to know, because often you will have another flight level than you have requested, and then it's nice for them to know what level that you are able to fly at the entry point, of course. So let's take a look at how it could sound. You always start with an initial call, and that would sound something like this. Condor 9 Papa Charlie, request Oceanic clearance. Then the controller would reply with Condor 9 Papa Charlie, pass your message. Then just read the clearance here. Condor 9 Papa Charlie, requesting clearance via track share, estimating Tobor at time 1346 Zulu, requested flight level 340, able 350, Mach decimal 80. Air traffic control will then take maybe a couple of minutes to prepare your clearance, and in the meantime get a pen and paper ready, because there can be some changes to the clearance. And the clearance would sound something like this. Shanwick clears Condor 9 Papa Charlie to Toronto via net track Sierra. From Tobor, maintain flight level 350, cross Tobor not before 1346 Zulu, Mach decimal 80. Then we'd of course read back the clearance, including the TMI number. Condor 9 Papa Charlie is cleared via net track Sierra. From Tobor, maintain flight level 350, cross Tobor not before 1346 Zulu, Mach decimal 8, TMI 356. We'd then receive a readback correct, return to domestic, and then we'd of course return to the domestic frequency. We would then in this case have to notify the domestic controller about any changes, and that would for instance be that we have to be at flight level 350 at Tobor. Then the domestic controller could tell us when we are cleared to climb, or make it at pilot's discretion, and in that case we just have to ensure that we are at 350 by Tobor. Another thing, when you get a time restriction, then you really have to keep an eye out for the time. Even if you haven't got a time restriction, you have to keep an eye out for the time as well. Since the time is so important, then if the time changes by 3 minutes or more, then we have to call in with a revised estimate. Let's say that we get delayed because of strong headwinds, for instance. Then we'd just call in Condor 9 Papa Charlie with revised estimate. Then we'd be told to pass our message. Condor 9 Papa Charlie, expecting Tobor, correction estimating Tobor at time 1349. Then the controller would just copy, and that is what you have to do if you have to revise your estimate. Let's look at another example. Let's say we are flying via random routing. I paste the route here from SimBrief, and we start at Eraka and generate. And if we look at the clearance, I am certain that you can understand why it is preferred to fly via a net track. There is significantly more to read here than when just flying along a net track. And it is required for everything to be read out as it is written here, which goes 60 north, 020 west. Let us do a quick position report as well before we head back into the cockpit. Let us just add the information. Condor 9 Papa Charlie. In this example, this is our first position report. Okay, let's look at it. Generate. So when doing these position reports, then we'll report the position that we passed, which is Tobor, the first waypoint, at what time we passed Tobor, our current flight level, our next waypoint, and at what time we will be estimating that waypoint, and then the waypoint thereafter. And that for that waypoint we do not need an estimated time. If you're using SimBrief, then bear in mind that SimBrief format is a bit different than this format, and it has to be read out exactly as it is written here. If we take a look, you can see that it reads 5320 and only north. With that format, it is assumed that you know the coordinate, if that makes any sense. So it has to be read out 54 north, 030 west. You probably noticed that I added a 0 there. Since there are so many formats how to write these coordinates, it's very easy to get them mixed up. But to my knowledge, it is correct phraseology to add the 0 before the last set of coordinates. The general rule of thumb is that we do a position report when we enter, when we cross a waypoint, or if we haven't done a position report in 45 minutes. And these position reports are of course only needed if you are not simulating ADS-B, because then air traffic control will have access to your position anyways. So if you're flying with ADS-B, then you would just be reporting that you enter the Oceanic region. You would just report overhead Tobor, and then you would say Gander next, because that is the next region that you would be flying to. The last thing that I want to mention is that the Oceanic clearance need to be obtained at least 30 minutes before entering Oceanic airspace. And remember, obtaining an Oceanic clearance is 100% the pilot's responsibility. Do not expect to get a handoff, so you better watch out for that clock. The procedures that I have told you about here only goes for the North Atlantic Oceanic airspace. The rules might differ a bit when you fly Oceanic in other parts of the world, or there may be some local rules and regulations in other parts than Scenic and Gander, as we have talked about today. This brings me to my last point, and a great tip that I have for you as a beginner if you are considering trying out flying Oceanic for the first time. Since I'm based in Scandinavia, hence the name, I have done a fair share of flights to and from Iceland. I can therefore warmly recommend flying to Iceland. As you can see here, Iceland is actually within Oceanic airspace, which means that the procedures are to be followed when flying to or from Iceland. The good things about flying to Iceland is that you have the coast of Norway over here fairly close, so you don't need to set aside the whole day for a flight. You can be done within 3 hours. And another aspect is, since Iceland is within Oceanic airspace, then you will need to obtain the Oceanic clearance together with your normal clearance when sitting at the gate in Reykjavik, for example. That was a big help for me when I started out flying Oceanic flights. I felt that I didn't have to stress over what if I don't get a handoff, who do I contact, and etc. You simply know that when you depart Reykjavik, then you have your Oceanic clearance, as you get it together with the other clearance, as I said before. You can then just enjoy the flight, and position reports is not needed in Iceland, which means that it is an easy way to get into it without it feeling too overwhelming, if you know what I mean. The last thing I want to mention, if you sit there and think that it's probably a good idea to try at Iceland, then head on over to Vatsim Scandinavia's website and take a look at this guide. Links will of course be provided in the video description. This guide is an A to Z guide of how the Oceanic airspace works around Reykjavik, or to be specific, of course, Iceland. You can see the structure here. I also want to show this as an example because there are some other rules regarding when you have to get your clearance. If we look here, there's different times. If you are arriving or in transit from Europe, then the rule is 25 minutes instead of the normal 30 minutes that we know from Gander and Scenic Oceanic. If you, for example, arrive from Canada, it would be 45 minutes and 30 minutes if you arrive from Russia. But if you look at this schematic overview here, you can see exactly who to contact, and if you look down here, you can even see the frequencies, and there are also some examples for the phraseology down here, and this is just very easy to understand, so I can warmly recommend to give it a read through if you want to try out a flight from Iceland, from or to Iceland. So this covers the basics, and I hesitate to say only the basics, as I am aware that we only scratched the surface. So next up, let's see this in action with live ATC. In my opinion, it feels very artificial when I just read out the clearance and then read back what the ATC would say and so forth. I think it makes a lot more sense when you see it in action, and that is why I have included this footage here. Before we head into the cockpit, I hope that you have found this tutorial useful, and I really hope that you would consider giving me a thumbs up, since this has been a very time-consuming process, but it has been really fun doing it, and it is something I don't think that there's so much of right now out there. And if you think that I'm onto something, then stay tuned for more flight sim related content on the channel. Then I haven't got much more to say. Call up the cabin, get them to bring you a nice warm cup of coffee, buckle up, and let us head back into the cockpit. I hope you will stay for the last scenic part of the flight, and thanks a lot for watching.
Vision 4 Romeo Kilo, contact Shamrock Radio 131.625 for Oceanic clearance, and report back with frequency.
131.625 for clearance, and then I'll be back with you shortly. Vision 4 Romeo Kilo.
A little bit of turbulence today.
Condor 9 Papa Charlie, contact Shamrock Radio 131.625 for Oceanic clearance, and report back on this frequency.
Shenwick on 131.625 for Oceanic clearance, and will report back. Condor 9 Papa Charlie. Okay, well, here goes. Gotta get the Oceanic clearance now. So we'll just go to Shenwick. And Shenwick, good day. Condor 9 Papa Charlie, request Oceanic clearance. Condor 9 Papa Charlie requesting clearance to Toronto Pearson via NatTrack Sierra. Estimating Tobor at 1346 Zulu. Requested flight level 340. Able 350. Mach decimal 82. Cell call Juliet Kilo Golf Sierra.
Condor 9 Papa Charlie. You are clear to destination Toronto with a level change. From Tobor, maintain level 350, Mach decimal 82.
Clear to Toronto from Tobor, flight level 350, Mach decimal 82, Condor 9 Papa Charlie.
Condor 9 Papa Charlie, feedback is correct. Position report will be with Oceanic, frequency 131.650, stand by for sample check.
Cell call check, all okay, and position report with Shanwick 131.650, Condor 9 Papa Charlie.
Condor 9 Papa Charlie, feedback correct. Return boost, frequency, goodbye.
We'll return to domestic, Condor 9 Papa Charlie, goodbye. Okay, so that all worked out.
Radio Aircraft Romeo requesting Oceanic clearance, estimating Tobor at 13.
So we'll return to domestic. And Shannon Control, good day again. Condor 9 Papa Charlie reporting back.